Hi, everyone. Welcome to another KE Report webinar. I'm your host, Cory Fleck, and this is part 2 of a series of webinars that I am conducting with Snowline Gold. I'm chatting again with Scott Berdahl, CEO of Snowline. Snowline is traded on the TSX Venture Exchange under the symbol SGD and on the OTCQB under the symbol SNWGF. I'll give the room some time to populate so all of you that are tuning in live can get the full update from Scott. Now, the first webinar that Scott and I did was back on April 18th. We focused on the Valley discovery on the Rogue project. This has been the main catalyst for Snowline Gold. On this webinar, we're taking a step back and looking at regional exploration. That's why this webinar is titled Regional Exploration Potential in an Emerging Gold District. The company has a number more targets on the Rogue project, as well as a number of other projects, all in the vicinity of the Rogue project that have exploration potential. Scott's going to walk us through all of what the company is planning on doing here. I've already received a lot of questions from all of you. Thank you for sending those in. For all of you attending live, you can ask questions live throughout this webinar, and I will interject those throughout this webinar. Scott, thank you for putting together this more focused presentation on the regional exploration opportunities. I'll let you take it away here, Scott. Thank you.
All right, that sounds great. Thanks for having me on, Cory. Yeah, and I don't think I'll encapsulate all we're hoping to do, and I definitely won't encapsulate all the potential here, but hopefully I can give a good overview of kind of what has us excited and where things are headed here. Obviously, I'll be making some forward-looking statements in here. This is especially regionally, we're much more forward-looking than we would be on a development scale project, but that's that's the excitement of exploration. And so this is a repeat from the last and a repeat from our corporate deck, but just I think gives a good overview. This is a big part of our land position in the Yukon. We now have over 3,600 square kilometers, so a dominant land position in the territory, and really a dominant land position in this part of the territory where we're effectively the only company in this Rogue Einerson region working, and we put together a large suite of targets, almost all gold, which is our focus, obviously, and a very early stage, very unexplored section of the Yukon Territory, but with very prospective rocks. So those colors you see in the background of the map are just various geological units, and you can see there's this big fold structure here that cuts kind of behind the Rogue and Einerson area, and then it's punctuated right in the middle of that fold about 90 plus million years ago by members of the Tombstone and a few different plutonic series, but basically a belt of intrusive rocks that cuts through the central Yukon and Alaska. But before that folding and before that, the introduction of those mineralized intrusions, these rocks were already looking really good. This part of the Yukon is the Selwyn Basin, and it is a geological analog to the Great Basin in Nevada. The Great Basin obviously is very well endowed with gold. Nevada, as a state, is competitive with most nations on the planet in terms of its gold output, and that's because of those Great Basin rocks. And at the same time, this is, we're talking like 500 million years ago, those sediments in Nevada were accumulating off the coast of what was ancestral North America. The whole continent was kind of shifted sideways then, and off that same coast, the Selwyn Basin was basically a lateral extension of the Great Basin, forming up here in the Yukon. And a lot has happened since then. A lot of the ground in between has had different geometries, even at that point, where I won't get into the specifics on it, but just when you open up an ocean and you form the basin that these sediments were deposited in, a certain condition happened in Nevada that also happened in the Yukon and didn't happen many places in between. And so that makes the Selwyn Basin very exciting very exciting place to be looked at. But unlike Nevada, it hasn't been run over time and again for a century and a half. We've had, despite the Klondike gold rush and despite some big discoveries, we've had very little exploration in the Yukon. And to my point, these are photos from our last two press releases, or at least last two exploration-related press releases. These are some of the discoveries we're making. So Valley on the top right and Jupiter on the bottom left, two different styles of gold deposit, two drill discoveries. We made both of them in our first year. But these are the prospects that we're finding. Basically, very obviously mineralized rock, and it might not look obvious necessarily to the untrained eye, although some of them might, like Jupiter, this rusty quartz just sticking out of the ground, and seeing more like that at Avalanche Creek. Valley, a very unusually high vein density in a reduced intrusion related gold system, so like a Fort Knox style gold system, and that's just sticking out of the ground there. And we had the release out this morning documenting some of the other discoveries we've made. Some really good grab samples coming from Sydney, as well as the field discovery last summer of this mineralization within this intrusion. And so I think that we're doing some really great work in terms of the approach we're taking with geophysics, geochemistry, really good geological thinking, structural observations, etc. But at the end of the day, we're tripping over things out there, and it's an exciting environment to be exploring in. So
Scott, are you essentially saying here, because it's something we hear a lot in the resource sectors, that all the easy deposits have already been found? That's why everyone needs to go deeper. What it sounds like you're saying here is that this is so unexplored that you're actually just finding it right at surface. It's as simple as walking the ground and taking some samples.
Yeah, I mean, that's what a lot of our discoveries have been so far. Jupiter and Avalanche Creek, for instance, Jupiter was found by Wang Jinyang, a geologist who worked for the company that had optioned those claims from us to begin with, and walking up this creek and seeing this float train, some decent silts coming out of there, and just following it up. And I went out there myself in 2019 and picked up on that same float train and traced it for 3 kilometers, where you're just seeing these boulders just crop out every turn of the stream. You see more of them. And they're assaying up to 25 grams in the in the grab samples, commonly well over a gram per ton. And just the fact that that's sitting there, and it had never been staked before. The Yukon keeps very good records. There are no existing mineral files of that occurrence, whereas in other parts of the territory, everything is very well documented. And following up on some of that work, I went out in 2020 and just on a very small program to keep the lights on, and just stumbled up this creek here. And you can see, I had my eyes very tuned to the Jupiter mineralization at that point, and walking up this, it was ecstatic to just find this mineralization everywhere for a good kilometer coming out here. And it's called Avalanche Creek because there's a big avalanche deposit right behind me that it's still it hadn't melted by September. And that's basically as far as I tracked it down the creek. I didn't bother going farther than that because there's plenty of stuff coming down the low here. And so yeah, it's like poking around with that analog to Nevada. It's a lot like poking around in the Great Basin in Nevada. 150 or 200 years ago, when no one had really looked at the rocks there. So it's a pretty exciting place to be exploring, and it's a pretty exciting place to have amassed almost 4,000 square kilometers of nearly uninterrupted ground and prioritized ground. We had and we have very good baseline data that's not available to the general public, that was collected by companies that we option things out to. We've collected more of our own. And so this, these claim positions are not just totally random. They're a lot more targeted than that. And even looking at this map, there's a good section up here in the northeastern Einerson area that the little colors that you see on the map, the geological unit outlines, in that area at least, they were mapped in 1952 by a guy on a 4-month horseback expedition. And those sketches, which are actually quite good, but still are still the basis for the maps that are, the most recent government maps there. The YGS is doing some good work in this area now, and they've done a lot in the vicinity, but still it's incredible that, that's kind of where we are with this, that the most recent visit to some of these outcrops, well, most of them have never been visited, but the ones that have been visited, they might have been visited by somebody on a 4-month expedition in 1952 who didn't really, who wasn't out there to look for mineral deposits, but was out there just mapping the general geology.
So what process do you have to go through then, Scott? If you're seeing some of this on surface, what further work do you do to refine targets, and what's the time frame? How quickly from walking ground can you build up a drill target?
It really depends on the target and how it plays out. Some of them come together very quickly. Some of them are more cryptic, and you have to figure things out. So yeah, I wouldn't put a precise number on it per se, but something like Valley, for example. Well, that was, that mineralization. This was found by another geologist working for another company that we had optioned out to. I mentioned him in the last talk, Shane Carlos, and he and some of the others on the team at that point went and found kind of the northern edge of this intrusion, and so it wasn't until 2021 that we made the drill discovery. So you say, okay, 9 years, but really that was like a day-long site visit that they did, and then we came back in there. So pretty much the next day, in terms of exploration, had there been continuous exploration. And we did a mag survey. We did a big soil survey over there, as we talked about last time. And that was with bad lab turnaround times at the time. And we were still able to get the results of all that in place and get the first drill holes in there in September of that year. So, that is basically a summer's exploration season plus a day in 2012 of making that first discovery and going from there. So it really depends. And I mean, in terms of the broad approach, we're looking at things, looking at establishing, as I mentioned, we have a very good baseline, but we're strengthening that, doing more geophysics, doing more geochemistry, filling in gaps, and looking at ways to really have a strong baseline so we don't miss things like another Jupiter hiding out there, another valley, which had been overlooked before because that intrusion's not on any geological map. It's kind of lost in the noise of a broader geophysical anomaly. And yeah, I mean, but at the end of the day, I expect us to find more things like this where we just come across an outcrop that's very interesting, and we're the first ones to really take a look at it.
All right. Hey, thanks, Scott. Let's get into some of these targets, some of the projects as well.
That sounds great. So this is just a glimpse at our thinking, and this is a very fluid kind of look at a lot of different targets, and you can see they're organized by project in terms of the color. The ones with squares around them or rectangles have been drilled before, either by us or historically. And this is really not set in stone, and it's not necessarily to say that the higher up something is, the next we're going to hit it, so to speak, but it's just an organization of us in terms of our own thinking of things like, are we going to drill it tomorrow, or do we need to do more work on it, and how does it rank versus other targets? And again, I think you ask any geologist on a team and you'll get a slightly different version of this, but we have some pretty clear front runners come to light in terms of what we want to approach this summer and other targets that we want to get out and continue to understand and get to the point where we want to drill them.
So is conceptual drilling, are those defined targets then? Are those ready to be drilled?
Yeah, effectively. Yeah, we know how we want to drill them, and those will likely all see a drill this summer. Of course, we'll have more concrete exploration plans out here in the near future. Our field season is very fast approaching. But yeah, those are ones that we could really pull the trigger on, and just go do it. And the delineation, towards the upper side of that box, those are targets that we could go and do a little bit more ground truthing and so on to shore up those targets. But I mean, if we had to, a lot of those we could stick a drill on right now to test the ideas, but we don't want to get irresponsible with how we're drilling things, and we'd like to, we have plenty in the pipeline to drill the most promising things first, and to figure out the rest, and whether or not we want to not just whether or not we want to drill them, which is an important consideration, obviously, but how best to drill them as well.
Okay. How do you go about ranking targets compared by project? Do you have certain projects that you just have more targets on that you would rather drill, or is it more just target specific?
No, it's not just target specific. There are considerations to take into account. Like, for example, Valley exists, and in our minds, that it does two things to our rogue project targets and other projects that are in the vicinity. It shows the potential of the rogue plutonic complex to produce these kinds of systems, and so all of those red targets are valley-like or just related to those sorts of intrusions targets. And so we have a lot of excitement for that whole suite of targets. And Valley really raises the bar in terms of the proven potential of those rocks to make that kind of a deposit. And at the same time, and again, you know, this is a very forward-looking statement, but what we see when we look at Valley and we see that high-grade, near-surface, big zone of mineralization with great metallurgy, you know, that says to us that this is a project that can support the capex needed to go ahead out there and do that handily. And so that really lowers the bar in terms of what else we need to find out there. What is the threshold that makes a target interesting? And, you know, maybe something, you know, like a direct analog to Fort Knox or something like that, like the sort of lower grade reduced intrusion type system, which might not have been interesting in that location initially, now might be. And so that kind of widens the envelope there. Yeah, so and then we are operating out of our Forks camp this summer. We're building a camp at Valley and looking at expanding out there in other ways as well. And so, you know, our infrastructure is there. It makes a lot of sense for us to focus there. We did a little bit of work on targets, Cliff and Tosh in the Southwest Yukon last year. We've actually, I think we were active on every single one of our projects last year. At least of our main projects. We have a few small claim blocks here and there. Yeah, for right now, you know, with the number of targets that we have right in that area, it makes a lot of sense for us to keep pushing ahead in that area where we're, you know, where the drills are, where the people are.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, thank you.
And yeah, like, and I just to anyone looking at this, you know, I wouldn't consider this set in stone by any stretch, but at least it gives an indication when you're looking at these big target maps that we have of you know, of where things are, because they're a lot of times they all just show up, you know, as stars on the map. And so they're obviously different. We look at, you know, we, in addition to the things we just discussed, we also look at, okay, you know, what do we see as the scale potentially? Like, what do we see as the ultimate prize here? And the likelihood of that. And so, you know, we can kind of generate some expected values and weigh that against the logistical efficiencies, both in terms of the exploration and in terms of the potential for extraction. And yeah, so just a quick view. So this is zooming in on the Rogue project. The boundaries have changed a little bit since this figure was put together, but they've expanded. And yeah, so these are some of the targets, not all of the targets. I won't go into detail. Actually, I don't have too much in this deck on too many of these at this point, but we'll fill people in as we continue along and as we advance some of these targets. But these are all actively on our radar at the moment. And yeah, so just to jump in, basically, you know, this is a 30 by 60 kilometer plutonic complex. All those red rocks are intrusive rocks that have come up through, and you can see this little one hiding behind the star that is Valley there. And those are kind of what we're looking for. They're not all super well mineralized. You know, we've spent a little bit of time on this one. It doesn't look too promising right out of the gate, but that doesn't mean that it's not. There's some little ones around Libya that look very interesting. And then there are other targets like Ramsey, Aurelius, and Gracie, where the intrusion doesn't even come out of the ground, but we strongly suspect it's there. Well, actually, at Ramsey, we have found the intrusion. It just doesn't show up on the maps, just like Valley didn't before we go out there. But Aurelius and Gracie, you know, we have good indication that it's there from the mineralization that we're seeing at surface, that it's been cooked by an intrusion.
Now, are all these similar to Valley targets then? When you do drill some of these, I know expectations probably will be way too high considering what you've hit at Valley, but would they be similar type systems?
Yeah, you know what, and I definitely wouldn't rule out finding another Valley. Of course, we would love to do that, or even to find Valley's bigger sibling. There's no rule that says that, you know, Valley has to be the biggest system out there. And it really is one of the very first kicks at the can. So we're pretty excited to keep looking. And the footprints that you see at systems like Gracie and Aurelius are quite impressive. So yeah, we'll see what we find. And then, as I was saying earlier, if really, you know, we see Valley as something that really can carry its own weight out there and more. And so So that does lower the bar, where we don't need to find another valley for it to be really exciting. And, we can find something akin to the more classical model, and it could still be quite accretive to the value of what we have out there.
Now, how do you weigh that out? Because this is an interesting concept where valley has definitely been a company driver. Obviously, if you can find another valley, a bigger valley, that's amazing. But if you find something that's maybe half the size of valley or doesn't quite carry the same grades, how do you balance that out with still going and testing these other targets or advancing that discovery?
I think it comes down to just value creation, and if you see that you can build value there, then you pursue it. And a lot of these targets, it's early stage to say that. We haven't really written them off for the most part, and a lot of them have, they're just brand new, and so we have a lot to do. And I don't think we're fortunate enough to get to that conversation. Granted, that's a valid conversation at every level of the pyramid, and we have targets that we've looked at, and you don't see in that doesn't mean we're done with them forever, but they don't really kind of fit into the priority ranking right now. But as we move forward, and say if we were to have the good fortune to drill into multiple additional targets, then we start to dig into other factors like the scale and the grade, and we start to pull out our beer napkins and figure out, okay, what does this look like from an economics point of view? Because really, that's exploration is fun, and the science of it is exciting, and discovery is great. But at the end of the day, if you're not finding something that is viable and valuable, then you haven't found anything. So I shouldn't say anything, but you haven't found what you're looking for as an exploration company. And so yeah, it comes down to figuring out what these discoveries look like economically once you've made them, and prioritizing in that way.
Can you give us some more info on this Gracie target? Somebody already was asking. It's a buried target. So what is your present understanding of Gracie?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've actually got a slide on that. Let me just skip up to it. And so yeah, this is that kind of east-west section that we just saw. Yeah, Valley, Gracie, Reed. Oops. Hope I'm not giving anyone seizures on the other end here, but this was, yeah, just a placeholder, or not a placeholder, but a leftover slide from that last presentation. I think it's interesting to look at some of the broader rogue property in the context of those initial. The green was the initial claims we had, and the some of these targets just outlined on there for reference, and seeing how it all comes together. But anyway, to get to your question, Gracie, exactly, it's a covered target, and so that is a bit of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it's harder to find. We don't have that outcrop in that initial picture where okay, there it is. Let's step back with a drill and put some drill meters into it and see what happens. That's what we had at Valley, and we had it obviously off to a great start after those holes in 2021. And then really, when we stepped into the heart of it, which it's covered, but only by a thin layer of glacial till and alluvial sediments. It's not covered like Gracie by bedrock. And so we didn't really get into the heart of Valley until we had already drilled into the edges of it, and then started to to step out and figure out how big the thing is. And when we were checking for the scale is when we found the really unique grades within it. At Gracie, we have bedrock in the way, so that's a much harder problem to deal with. It is in the sense of obviously drilling through it, but in terms of finding it, it does have some advantages in that you won't have necessarily a mask of other material that's washed over it. But you have the altered rocks that are around this intrusion. And this is obviously, I hope, a very schematic diagram cutaway of just, the general model here is that you have an intrusion that comes up and it solidifies, and at the late stages it cracks, and you get these sheeted veins that form like some of the last fluids to solidify, or they don't even solidify because they're aqueous fluids, but they deposit a lot of what they have in them. And they crack out, and you basically shatter your intrusion, and you form your reduced intrusion related gold system. And often, just as a result of that process, the top of the system is the most fertile part. And we see that to an extent in Valley, where our best mineralization is right at surface. And that also likely means that a lot of the best part of the deposit is eroded away. So that's the other edge of the sword. The first is that it's cutting against you, is that it's harder to find. You don't know exactly, we don't know where Gracie is. When I drew this, this was before we drilled anything into it. And of course, I put it optimistically close to the right next to the bottom of that hole there. We're still not quite sure where it is, but we do know it's there from that. You can see this hornfels, basically this rust. Prospectors are often looking for gossans, just red parts of mountains and hills and that sort of thing, which is basically minerals that have been placed into the rocks through whatever means, and then they're oxidizing, they're rusting away. And so that's what we have at Gracie. And the alteration that you see there is called hornfels. It basically means that it's a low pressure but high temperature, which basically means that these rocks have been cooked by something hot. And so there are no intrusions around it that would do that. And so the only place for that intrusion to be is under it. And then complementing that, the minerals at Valley, the gold at Valley is complemented by bismuth and tellurium minerals. And so those aren't everywhere. It's actually, you don't find those every day. But there's a very high correlation between gold, bismuth, and tellurium at Valley. And we see that same thing in these sediments above Gracie. And actually, a lot of our initial exploration was focused. This is a plan map of Gracie, just looking down at the system. You can see a 500-meter scale there. A lot of this was focused on that, really this conceptual model, and trying to get down below that valley there and chasing some of the surface rocks. But the surface rocks are really in those sedimentary layers. There are a lot of it's non-reactive, and so you just get these sheeted veins like you have at Valley, but they're not very dense. And we see that at Valley too. As soon as you're outside of the intrusion, the density of the veins drops off. And just looking at this core, this is what drives the mineralization, is how many of those veins do you have, or how much quartz do you have ultimately. Because the rocks, even at Valley, even in this high-grade zone at Valley, the rocks in between these quartz veins are pretty dead. And so if you get down to only having one of these veins per meter, or even one every 2 meters or something like that, you still have the mineralization, but you just don't have the grades you need to make something work. And so we see that right when we leave the intrusion at Valley, and we see that in Gracie, and some of the core from Valley right outside the intrusion. You could put that right next to from right outside the zone, put that next to some of our Gracie drill holes so far, and it's just almost indistinguishable about the hornfels. And so we don't know with some of these holes if we're 5 meters away or 500 meters away. And so it's we are working at ways to vector, and one of those comes down to that bismuth and tellurium. And so this area here is circled on the map, and we're seeing, although the surface rock samples aren't quite as impressive, we are seeing a lot stronger of a component of bismuth and tellurium. And in the drilling there, that was the one hole that came back with strongly anomalous bismuth and tellurium values compared to the rest of the holes. And also one nice surface development we had in 2023 was finding granodiorite dikes. And so we hadn't seen that at Gracie previously. And so that was a great discovery, a grab sample of one of those with quartz vein material in it, assayed 34 grams per ton. We put the drill hole on. Unfortunately, the drill hole didn't intersect a dike, but as I mentioned, it picked up on those pathfinders. And so that's a pretty interesting thing to see. And then we're also doing some careful reprocessing of the geophysics we have for this area. An initial look at it kind of shifted the anomaly here that I don't have an image of that, but initially it was also under this bowl, and it's kind of shifted up into this direction. That was part of the drill strategy last year. We wanted to drill from up here. Unfortunately, there were technical difficulties with the abilities we had last year to drill from this bowl, just because it's rocks with ice underneath it. And it's not impossible to drill from that kind of a setup, but we weren't prepared to do it last year, so we had to kind of scrap that program and went and drilled over here. And so we may be revisiting here, we may be coming back. And the analogy I like to use is that hornfels is like feeling the heat of a campfire. We're looking for the campfire itself, but drilling here and hitting that bismuth and tellurium is a lot like drilling through the smoke of a campfire. So with heat, if you don't have a vector, you just know it's hot. You don't necessarily know which way to go from it. But with smoke, we know it's not going down. It's traveling up, and so we can start to follow that plume towards the campfire.
Okay. How many more drill holes do you think you would need to put into this to get a better understanding of if it still warrants follow-up, or if Gracie target might not be high priority?
Well, just one if we drill the right hole, I guess. But on the flip side of that equation, it's you could argue for way too many. So yeah, that's a good question. And I think we're in a good place where we can we're back against the wall and we have to make a discovery tomorrow. We can start to think critically about, okay, what information do we have and how do we spend this money wisely? And so we are considering doing a few more careful looks at the rocks, basically. without going into too much detail, of trying to figure out what vectors we can find. And then so if we can, if we can get even proximity indicators, then you can build vectors and start to go more towards that that campfire, that heat source.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
And similarly, another covered or just unexposed intrusion is under Aurelius. And just looking back at this district picture, you can see both the geochem coming off Aurelius and the mag picture at Aurelius. This is all old data. Like, this is the Yukon Geological Survey streams data. This is publicly available magnetic data. You can see the high there. Yeah, very coarse data, but it works to an extent. And so Aurelius is there, and we poked around in 2022 a little bit in this area. We found this granodiorite. It was not mineralized. You can see our grab samples aren't spectacular in this area, but then coming over here and just getting more systematic with the soils, following up with some trench sampling, it really comes together. And for reference, if you recall in the last seminar, our last conversation, our anomaly that we had at Valley, and there's a bit of an apples to oranges comparison here, because these are predominantly talus spines, and we're looking at the Hornfels signature, whereas Valley we're right on the intrusion, we're right on the mineralization, and we're down in a better developed soil profile. But nonetheless, at Valley, for all that we found at Valley, it wasn't the most impressive soil anomaly on the planet by any stretch. It was about 900 meters long and about 150 meters wide, depending on where you measured it. And there were even some big incontinuities or discontinuities in it over actually some of the highest grade zones, where I mentioned that alluvial material that basically washed from that creek over the years had kind of gone back and forth and just introduced a bunch of barren material on top of it. And so anyway, 900 by 150 meters. And, here we're looking at 2 kilometers, 500 meters width. And unlike Gracie, I think I cut myself off, but that Hornfels, where we're getting the good rock samples, they're generally lenses and pods and thin layers of sediments that are reacting, or the veins themselves, which I mentioned have low density. Here at Aurelius, there are a few different sedimentary units, including some volcanics, and those seem to be more reactive to the fluids that are coming up. And so we're actually seeing mineralization in those, as evidenced by these chip samples. 17 meters at 2 grams, 14 meters at 2.3 grams, and a few other things. And so that's encouraging in itself. And, we may have a target in the sediments, and there are reduced intrusion related gold systems that are housed entirely in the sediments, or at least they, the intrusion hasn't been found. But we're also pretty excited by the potential for the near surface proximity of this intrusion, based on that outcropping granite across the hill. And we're doing some work on geophysics, and we'll be building on that as well to see if we can get a better picture of what's underground there, and basically get smarter about targeting.
This must be a priority for you, though, hey? With these surface samples and just how big this target is.
Yeah, it's definitely climbed up the pyramid very quickly. Yeah, from basically 2022 having the results that you see in the northwest part of this, and that. I'm not sure if it even really made it into the pyramid, except for it was always on our radar because of that stream geochem and that mag anomaly. And so yeah, coming back this year, it's come a long way very quickly, and really it's done a lot of what we did with Valley in 2021. We've kind of done here in 2023, and so yeah, we're keen to get to it and to test out a few initial ideas with the drill, and hopefully just make a discovery right out of the gate.
Any chance Aurelius and this Livia here could connect in some way?
Potentially, yeah. I always try to kind of shoot people away from that idea when they talk about Gracie and Valley, and like, yeah, it could happen, but it's probably very deep, and maybe, is it, even if they connect magmatically, are they mineralized in that area? Here, this is really interesting. I mean, we don't have the level of understanding we have for that other system just yet. It's very nascent. The alteration that we're seeing in the southern end of Livia, and the mineralization is very reminiscent of the alteration and mineralization that we're seeing at the southern end of Aurelius. You have a few different little pods of granodiorite coming up. Not little, I mean, there's still, hundreds of meters across, or pods of intrusive coming up. And yeah, so there's a complicated magnetic picture here. There's a complicated structural picture, which is great when you're looking for this kind of a thing. I mean, these are complicated in geology can be good, and it can lead to a relatively simple system like Valley once you get into those right conditions for forming a big deposit.
Okay. Yep. Thank you.
And I'm not, as I mentioned, I wasn't going to do anything justice, and I think we're already coming up on time here. And so, Valley or Rogue itself deserves a lot more than that. And even the press release we had out just today, May 2nd, is shows that we're still just tripping over new targets out there and finding really new, interesting things. I wanted to point out is Ramsey. That was something that I saw when I put this deck together. It wasn't lost on me that there's this random mag highway out here under this basically valley bottom. It's like, well, how could you ever explore that? And so it was pretty exciting to have a field crew go out there and right away, very little in terms of outcrop out there. So as you'd expect, it's going to be a tough target, but to find an outcrop and to see sheeted quartz veins in that outcrop, and then to find bismuthinite and visible gold in those sheeted quartz veins, it's like, wow, right out of the gate, just going out there, first look at it, and we have VG. Like, it's, as a prospector, it's very rare to find a new instance of VG. And so to do that there, it's very exciting. So we're pretty excited by that, and also just by so much of what we're finding out there and what it says about the potential of this district.
Okay. Yeah, let's get to Einerson, because there's a few questions even on those, especially around the initial Jupiter discovery. But talk to us about Einerson, what you prioritize here.
Sure. So, I mean, Jupiter at this point is a priority, largely because of the stage that it's at. It's, we've made a bona fide discovery there. We put it on the back burner for two reasons. One is because Valley is really an exceptional discovery. Not that Jupiter couldn't evolve into something quite exceptional itself. I mean, we had multiple 100-gram-meter plus holes on the very first drill program on a blind orogenic target. So that itself is pretty exciting. But the other reason we didn't follow up is just the ownership situation, which, as of just last week, we had the release out. We've entered into a definitive agreement to get the full ownership there and to acquire Venus as well, and so that's pretty exciting. And so Jupiter is back on the radar and something that we're looking to explore again. And then the same factors as before, there are, you have to weigh the geology and what you see as the potential versus how that relates to the potential economics and then the locations. And I think the economics and the locations are kind of hand in hand. I mean, it all goes together. But for exploration now, things like Avalanche Creek, Mars are very easy to drill. You can see our main Forks camp right here. We're something like 5 or 6 kilometers from Avalanche Creek. So it's a great place to be looking. I'll just kind of go through. I don't have everything on every one of these targets, and I don't think we have time to get there, but I will bring this slide back up, and this is kind of exited out of the back of our corporate deck, but I had this in early on, and really this is a figure I came across from a 2011 paper that's really interesting, really caught my attention. Basically, it's looking at, okay, where's the gold coming from in a lot of diverse gold systems around the world, and arguing for a fairly common cause that basically ties in very well with that Great Basin and Selwyn Basin analog. And both of these rocks have the prerequisite conditions and the subsequent deformation history to form some fantastic types of gold system. And so you have basically Fosterville here, or Bendigo, and there's a continuum of types of deposits here. You have the reefs, but you also have more structurally like fault controlled systems. You have the Carlin trends in Nevada, which of course have made that into the global players that we touched on earlier. And then you have kind of oddball things like Sukhoi Log in Russia, where you have one of the largest, if not the largest, undeveloped gold resource on the planet. And you see a very common environment. You can see like, okay, well, what happens to a Carlin style fluid if it doesn't hit these right carbonate traps? And anyway, I don't want to go down a technical road, but seeing potential examples of each of these styles of mineralization at Einerson, and then having those Fort Knox style intrusions coming through those same background rocks at Rogue, that was really what gave me the conviction when we launched Snowline that this is our flagship. This is what we want to go after. This could potentially be a world-class gold district sitting out there. And of course, to hit 2 drill discoveries right out of the gate, I think is a strong confirmation of that. And this still is very relevant. And so at Einerson, we're seeing these kind of shallow orogenic systems. We're seeing Carlin-style mineralization, especially with things like Venus, which we just acquired. And then our Ursa target has some interesting parallels to Sukri Log, but that's very early stage. I won't get into that further right now, but yeah, Jupiter. So, this is blind. This is just that float train, like that picture we looked at earlier of the boulder next to the stream. That was almost all we had to go on. There was a kill zone in one area where the concentrations of various elements in the soil are so strong that vegetation isn't really taking root. In another area, this area, actually, there was just a linear on the hillside that would actually lined up with like a gun sight with that kill zone about 1 kilometer away. And that suggests that there's a structure coming through. Even though there's glacial till draped over almost everything, we didn't have any mineralized outcrops. We knew the till was shallow because there were some non-mineralized outcrops. And so, we drilled through it. Indeed, it was quite shallow, but we drilled over a more than 1 kilometer area in a 3 kilometer geochemical anomaly. And we hit some pretty fantastic grades at various parts of the system. So orogenic, you often need to know exactly where you're drilling and do it very precisely. And the fact that we didn't know and we just kind of took some swings at this and they hit, and then so we stepped out 1 kilometer, we drilled again, we hit our first visible gold. That is really exciting for a first kick at an orogenic system. So we're keen to get back to Jupiter. Venus, it's probably not on the docket for drilling this year, but we'd like to get out there and sink our teeth into it. It's a new acquisition. It was privately held during that last kind of gold rush in the Yukon, where Carlin-style mineralization was really the flavor of the day. And I think there are considerations to take into account when you're looking at Carlin, but on both the economic side of the energy input for extraction and so on, but also on the potential scale side. And again, what that's done to Nevada. So certainly has our attention. And this picture on the right, I think, is just another example of how unexplored this area is, where you can have this realgar, not an inconspicuous mineral at all, outcropping across this mountainside. And again, it had never been documented in any kind of a report, a min file, anything. Basically, no one had seen it before. And so, it's a really exciting country to be exploring in, where things like this are, again, sticking out of the ground. I think the best grab sample off this was 191 grams per ton. And yeah, some good historical drill intersections as well, but some things to figure out there. Yeah, the Mars trend. Anyway, I know we're kind of over our time allotment here, so we don't need to go through targets
People
one by
are still
one.
tuning in. That's okay. You keep going.
Yeah, Mars is another one that we almost drilled it in 2021, but we decided to move the drill instead down to Valley, and obviously that drill hasn't left Valley since. So yeah, Mars is interesting. I think it's been kind of jostled out of position by some of the other targets that have come online since, but it was really it saw some limited historical drilling with very consistent but lower grade results. But really where they drilled was done before the bigger geochemical picture was in place. And so there's a almost 4 kilometer anomaly there that really is untested. And at the very south end on an offshoot of it is where the drilling has been done to date. And even then the mineralization there is very intriguing. And so we're keen to get our heads around Mars and get to it. And really it's on a parallel fault system. You can see where Jupiter is here. And this is what Jupiter looked at the time. This figure is a bit old now. It was just a few soil anomalies and those rock samples. But it's on a fault here, or just in the hanging wall of a fault, which is like the upper part of an angled fault. And Mars is in that same kind of a position on a parallel fault. And with these shallow orogenic systems, I mean, the analog, of course, that most investors would know about right now is Queensway and what Newfound Gold is drilling. That's a great shallow orogenic system. Fosterville, of course, is kind of the one that everyone would like to find, with that swan zone within it. They've been mining that for years and years, then got into very high grade mineralization that made that company got swallowed up, and then the company that swallowed that up got swallowed up. So it's these things can get pretty exciting pretty quickly. And then 12 kilometers south along the same structure where it cuts through the ridge, this is that Avalanche Creek target again. And so to see that same style of mineralization that's at Jupiter 12 kilometers south shows that you have a mineralized district scale set of faults here that have a lot of potential. So we're keen to get back and keep on testing that. We'll have more concrete exploration plans out here in the near future. We're looking at basically mobilizing our team mid-month. We have people on the ground already fixing up our camp. We cleared off our airstrip and are letting it melt off. So the season is very quickly approaching, and we'll have basically a plan out for folks to sink their teeth into in the near future here as we put the finishing touches on it ourselves. And of course, I think Mike Tyson said everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. So the caveat with that when we do release it is that, if we hit big on Aurelius or somewhere else, we're going to be probably shuffling a few things around and rethinking the plan really quickly. So that's kind of where we are now. And we're really excited to be in a district that has such huge potential, so little competition, such a big land position, having the resources to explore. And, when we go and approach these targets, whether it's a Gracie or Aurelius or even something up on Einerson, we're very fortunate to have Valley as an engine. I think maybe we touched on this before, but we don't have to dilute our shareholders in a tough financing market to the same degree that we would have to. I mean, that's not to say that we're cavalier with our spending and don't care where those dollars go, but we can, and very few juniors in this kind of market can do this kind of thing where you can go and drill, several holes at a Gracie and not hit and sit back and think about it and decide where you want that next hole to go, as opposed to just, having to put that target on the shelf for the next several decades. So we're really happy to be able to kind of stay integrated for the time being and to use the leverage that we have with Valley to really hit this district hard.
Yeah, that was one point that stuck with me from our last webinar, was when somebody asked, would you spin these other projects out into another company? And you said, no, that's not the strategy. We can use Valley to help explore these other areas. So thanks for reiterating that. Let's get to a couple questions here in terms of specific targets. Emerald Lake Pluton. This is a target that I didn't see in any of the maps. Somebody's asked a question if you can discuss the geological characteristics of that target.
I believe there have been theses written about that Pluton for how underexplored this area is. Some parts of it have been looked at. And so that one is, that's a more deeply eroded system. There's some very interesting zones of mineralization. It's not going to be a direct Valley analog there, but still, within the spectrum of a reduced intrusion style gold system. And so there are a few kind of sub-targets within that Pluton or zones that have caught our attention. And that is an area that has seen some historical exploration as well. So it's super keen. You can find Yukon min files there, and you can find the exploits of I think 2 waves of past geologists who kind of looked at that and found some really interesting things. And so we're, it's still in a pretty conceptual stage for us in terms of target delineation and just figuring out what's there and how we would, whether and how we want to approach it. But certainly the amount of gold mineralization in that broader Pluton is not lost on us.
Okay. What about this Olympus claim block? It's along the North Canal Road. Will there be exploration there this year?
Yeah, we're planning to go back there. And we don't have plans to drill at the moment, but like I say, things can always change. We recognize that exploring right next to the North Canal Road has its advantages in terms of, the economic conversation that we were having earlier. Those targets are a little lower in the pipeline. Some of them are still in generative phases. They're just not on this particular graphic. But yeah, things like Colossus do look pretty interesting, and we want to see if we can think of a way that we want to drill it, and we can move to do so at that point.
Okay, let's talk about kind of the steps when you drill a new discovery. Let's say you make a new discovery here. How quickly will you go into metallurgical work?
When we know that it's worthwhile, that's something that it's a key piece in terms of understanding that economic picture, and but it itself is part of the economic picture at the exploration stage. And so you want to make sure that you've got something worth grabbing onto by the time you're going forth with metallurgical testing. So we're not necessarily going to right off a target, right out of the gate, just on a few grab samples because they have bad metallurgy, and we probably won't spend that money to do the metallurgy at that stage. But and that's to say, you don't want to walk over a 40 million ounce deposit because you didn't like what the metallurgy came back with in the grab samples. So so there's a bit of a balance there, but certainly, before getting to like valley stage exploration with something, we want to have a good handle on the metallurgy.
Now, when it comes to prioritizing targets as well, looking even further out to a discovery, to even resource delineation, what about permitting? How much do you consider permitting and how it could vary between this large land package?
Yeah, it's a good question. And really, we don't have, I guess, key, in like any reason to suspect that permitting would be vastly different from one target to another. And so, of course, access to infrastructure is a key component of permitting. And so, okay, if you have to build a road X kilometers versus 5X kilometers, that's an equation, and that also it just directly aligns with the economic considerations as well. And I mean, we do have different targets that are in different First Nations traditional territories, and so those conversations are going to be different depending on which First Nation you're speaking with, or First Nations. And so those are certainly considerations as well. But so far, we've had very good conversations with the various First Nations who either whose traditional territories we're exploring in, or who might be affected by the projects that we're doing. And so so far that hasn't really been an aspect in the let's do this one and not this one because of where it is on that basis. So no, I mean, that's a really good question, and it's something that is on our radar, but at this point it hasn't been really dictating how we are spending our exploration dollars.
Okay. Yeah, I think a lot of people too are just wondering about permitting at Valley, but that's still a ways off, I think, with all the drilling that still is going to happen there. Let's wrap it up with a final question, and it's been asked a couple different ways here, and it's more about prioritizing the targets for this year. I know we're waiting on the concrete exploration plans for this year, but give us a little heads up if you could, Scott. What will be a priority?
I mean, oops, wrong way. I think this, like I say, with all the caveats and disclaimers that I threw in front of this figure earlier on, this is a crude look at what will be happening in terms of prioritization this year. We talked about Valley and how we want to approach that in the last one. And with the remaining budget, we'll be looking at trying to drill as many of these targets as we can, and obviously starting with those in the conceptual drilling phases and seeing how we can add the most value, where the low-hanging fruit are, and going at it like that. And there are other logistical considerations as well, like if you have a high target, maybe there's a certain time of year where your water line is easy because you don't have to go too far, versus if you wait until September, there's not going to be any water up there. So that kind of a thing might inform the sequencing in terms of what's drilled when.
Okay. Scott, thank you very much for taking time walking us through more of the regional opportunities here. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in and sending in your questions. You can always keep emailing me your questions to my email address, fleck@kereport.com. I'll be having Scott on the show to cover some of the more recent news coming up. And we're even going to put another webinar together, more just broad exploration focused. Might even have a special guest on for that one as well. So stay tuned for future webinars and future interviews with Scott and the rest of the team at Snowline. Scott, thank you very much for your time today.
Awesome. Thank you, Cory, and thanks everyone who tuned in.